It's over. The war is over. Folks, I've been talking to you about this for a long time now, and every time we talk about the Russia-Ukraine war, I think we've used titles something like, "Is this the end game? Are we nearing the end?" And the answer is definitely now. We are actually seeing the contours now of the actual physical end to this war are now coming into focus. And unfortunately, we still have too many people, and that includes NATO, the United States, and definitely in Kiev, just seem to be unwilling or unable, and I'm not sure which it is, to acknowledge the truth. But there can be no doubt, and there should be no doubt in anyone's mind, that this issue is over. We're now, the only thing we're waiting to find out is how many more Ukrainian people have to be killed, how much more territory is going to be lost, and when are we going to actually acknowledge where we are so that we can get down to the business to start these negotiations I've been calling for since February 2022. That's where we are right now. And in case anybody thinks that I'm overstating the case here, that the end is absolutely now in sight, I'm going to show you a number of things that we have here. I'm going to show you on the diplomatic, on the political, and on the military aspect on the ground, because we're always about what is the on the ground realities here. Forget about what anybody wants, what they wish, what is true on the ground. And all of those things combined make it extraordinarily clear to anyone, even those who have been, big cheerleaders from the beginning of this on the Ukraine side and who have wanted to see Russia lose. I get it. I understand why people would want to have that opinion, especially if those who are living in the region, those who live in Ukraine, those who live near Ukraine, on the border there. I understand their position. But wanting something and physically being able to have it are two very different things. And when all of the pieces are very clear, crystal clear, that your desired outcome is impossible, you now start harming your own interests. And those are the people you say you support if you don't acknowledge it and then do the best you can to get the best outcome possible and end the bloodshed. Now, it appears at least that one person is aware of that, and that's incoming President-elect Donald Trump, who went on Meet the Press yesterday, was asked some pretty pointed questions. And the exchange here you're going to see is a little bit humorous, but it's also important about where he doesn't say, or where he doesn't go.
Should Ukraine prepare for less aid from the United States after you're sworn into office?
Yeah, probably. Sure.
You said you can end the war in 24 hours. You've even said you want to try to end it before you're sworn into office. You're actively trying to?
I am.
Have you talked to President Putin?
No, I have not.
You haven't talked to President Putin
No, I have
since
not.
you've been elected?
No. Well, I don't want to say that, but I haven't spoken to him recently.
So you've spoken to President Putin since you've been elected?
I don't want to say that. I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want to do anything that could impede the negotiation.
So you see that last part. I don't want to do anything that's going to impede the negotiation. But he did say at the beginning, the first question, are they going to get less aid? Sure, of course they're going to. And it was a little humorous how she said, did you talk to Putin? No. Well, I mean, not recently. Oh, then you did talk to Putin. Well, I'm not going to say that because look, obviously he has been. There's been reports about this a lot, and he all but admitted it right there. He has been talking to him because he wants to end this war, and he has been signaling that very clear. And as we're going to see, I'm going to show you something he put on Truth Social here shortly. But he is unambiguous. He was meeting in Europe this week. He was attending in France of the reopening of the Louvre, not the Louvre. I'm sorry. What was that? The thing that was
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. Sorry, I don't know what I got the tongue tied there. He was there for the opening of the Notre Dame, and he met with Emmanuel Macron. And this picture you can see on the screen there, where he also met with Zelensky, and they all met together on that. You have to know that Trump told him, this is where we're going. There's no like he's telling Zelensky one thing in private and then saying these other things in public. He's just not saying that. He has got to be telling him that. But then you have to wonder, if Trump is telling him that privately, if he is saying all of these things publicly, and there's a lot more than what we can show you here, then one would have to ask, why on the same day that Trump said that, did Zelensky say this?
Якщо буде така пауза, поки України немає в НАТО,
І навіть якщо б у нас було запрошення, а ми не були в НАТО, і буде така пауза, що буде в цей час? Хто нам гарантує якусь безпеку? І скажу вам відверто, ми можемо подумати і попрацювати над позицією Еммануеля. Пам'ятаєте, він пропонував, щоб якась частина військ тієї чи іншої країни була присутня на якихось територіях України, які б гарантували нам безпеку, поки Україна не в НАТО. Але ми повинні мати до цього чітке розуміння, коли Україна буде в ЄС і коли Україна буде в НАТО, розуміючи наше майбутнє.
What does he mean until they get into NATO? Folks, that's not going to be part of any deal. I've been saying this since before the war started and all the way through it. Ukraine will never be in NATO. Not now, not later. And the reason it's not is because it's not in the alliance's interest to do so. Nobody in the alliance, or certainly not all 32 nations, which is now required. You have to have all 32 agree, not just most, but all. They have to agree to any new member that comes in, and they will never, never do that. Almost likely the United States would never do it. But for sure, Hungary and Slovakia and Turkey are definitely not going to do it. They're not going to agree to give Article 5 assurances to a country that has been at war with Russia and has been antagonistic with Russia since the beginning. And now then, because of all this conflict that's happened here in the last almost 3 years, it will be generations before there's even possibility of good relations before any kind of a deal that's going to be done now, any kind of whether it's a ceasefire, an armistice, or an actual end of conflict agreement is going to leave exceptionally angry and bitter and hatred on both sides of the line there. And so that for as long as we can see in our lifetimes, there's going to continue to be the possibility that this thing could erupt back again. If there are NATO security guarantees on the Ukraine side, that gives them more incentive and more motivation to act on that in the future. People know this. Leaders of European countries know this. They're not going to tie their own security to a potential hothead, not Zelensky, but anyone who may follow him in the future that may want to go down that path. They're not going to do it. So there is no NATO coming in to offer a membership to Ukraine. And I saw reports just before we came on the air here that Zelensky apparently is trying to get Biden before he gets out of office to give such a guarantee. And it's meaningless. Even if Biden were to give it, which I can't imagine that he would do it. I mean, in fact, he won't. There's no chance of that either. But in the hypothetical case that he did, he's not going to be president anymore. And he would never be able to act on it. And the guy who's coming in is telling you all he's interested about is trying to end the war and to seek a negotiated settlement. And it's funny because you talk about the Biden administration, what they're doing now that they're heading out, just to show you how unlikely they are to ever act on this ridiculous demand or desperate request of Zelensky. Here's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Saturday trying to kind of excuse what his government has been doing.
When it comes to Abrams tanks, we have sent Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Those Abrams tanks units are actually undermanned because it's not the most useful piece of equipment for them in this fight, exactly as our military said. When it comes to F-16s, President Biden authorized the sending of F-16s to Ukraine last May. It's now December of 2024, and we've had a limited number of pilots trained, not because we're not prepared to train them, we are, as many as possible, but because the Ukrainians do not have the pilots to be able to build a full F-16 capability in time.
You think? Really? So you're telling me, let's parse what or explain what he's actually saying right there. Because he thinks he's given some kind of mea culpa, like, hey, it ain't our fault. We've been trying to do this stuff, but these other folks here over in Ukraine, it's their fault. Okay, you just told us that your military advisors told you that just giving a bunch of Abrams tanks is not going to change anything. You say the problem with F-16s is not the platform itself, but that there are not qualified pilots. Really? You're just now figuring that out? I mean, those Abrams came in before the offensive, the Ukraine offensive in 2023, along with lots of other NATO tanks that were coming in, Challengers, Leopards, AMX-10s from France, etc., along with thousands of armored vehicles from all these different countries. So you're telling me now that your military experts then told you it wasn't going to make any difference, then why, may I ask, did you authorize them? Why did you keep saying all during that time, Jake Sullivan, President Joe Biden, why did you keep saying that Russia has to lose, Ukraine will win, and we're going to support them as long as it takes to get there? If you knew that at the time you said that it wasn't going to happen, then why did you continue to support the war? Why did you continue to provide funding and continue to say out loud that they were going to win if you knew they weren't? So either you were lying back then and you did know it wasn't going to work, or you're lying now to try to cover your tracks and try to somehow blame somebody else. But you can't do that. It's not going to work anyway, because unless someone is just literally blind and deaf and they won't hear the truth no matter what it is, we could hand it to them on a silver platter and they still wouldn't accept it. Those people, you can say they'll buy that stuff. But anyone who's independent minded and honest and objective in what they look at can see that almost certainly you knew back then. I wrote about it at the time before this offensive. When they talked about tanks, I told you exactly why it wasn't going to work. I told you the reason why the whole offensive was almost certainly doomed to failure. I even left out the possibility that maybe they would get a little bit of support or a little bit of offensive success, but that even that wouldn't matter. As it turned out, they didn't even get that. They literally broke their teeth on the first of 5 lines of Russian defenses. And as you know, from that point forward, everything to this day has been moving westward from the Russian lines because they knocked them out. And all of those things were clear beforehand. So this is one of the questions that the administration in the future here is going to have some hard questions to answer. And they're going to try to, just like they did with Afghanistan, they're going to try to shovel it off and blame somebody else. But folks, you were in charge. You had the power. You're the one that called the shots. So you're going to have to answer for a lot of things like that. And shows like this one are going to make sure those questions get asked. And we're not going to just go quiet and subject, because the consequences and the cost to this kind of thing are really, really high. And so we need to answer those questions. Okay, that's later on. But let's look at where we're at right now. So in the Guardian, along the lines with what the Trump just said in that opening clip there, you see that he's looking for, quote, an immediate ceasefire. That reason why that's in quote is because that's a quote from Trump in his Truth Social account, where, Gary, if you can throw that one up there, where he explained that, okay, Assad's gone and he's fled his country and blah, blah, blah. They're talking about a lot of stuff about the Middle East. But then he shifts over here and he says that Russia has lost all interest in Syria because of Ukraine, where close to 600,000 Russian soldiers lay wounded or dead, which is higher than most people believe, but whatever. That's, I guess, what he's being told. But then he starts saying, likewise, Zelensky in Ukraine would like to make a deal and stop the madness. They have ridiculously lost 400,000 troops and many more civilians. There should be an immediate ceasefire. There's that term, and negotiations should begin. Too many lives are being needlessly wasted, too many families destroyed, and if it keeps going, it can turn into something much, much bigger, far worse. And then he says he knows Putin well, and he can. They have time to act, and they can have a negotiated settlement. Now, whether or not there's actually 600,000 Russian losses is almost certainly an exaggeration. It makes literally no sense to say, yes, a war that's lasted almost 3 years with a side that has millions more men and occasionally as much as 10-to-1 advantage in firepower and manpower all across the thing, and has been going on an offensive now for well over a year, somehow has lost 200,000 more casualties than the side that has less firepower. I mean, that's irrational and illogical. So I'm not really sure how anybody thinks that makes any sense. But that 400,000 figure is probably a good one. Actually, Zelensky came out and said, no, that's simply not true. There's only 43,000 troops killed in their war with Russia, which they said is big, but it's not. I mean, that just literally makes no sense, because what Zelensky is asking you to believe is that while 43,000 of his troops have been killed, hundreds of thousands of the Russians, even though they've been at a 10-to-1 disadvantage in firepower, and the Russians keep pushing them back. So it makes no sense if you have the least amount of common sense in your mind, even if you're not a military expert. That just is dumb. But that just shows you, again, another data point on how detached from reality Zelensky is. And he keeps wanting people to believe these things that have no basis in fact at all. I want to look at some other things here because first of all, let's see what the Russian side has said in response to Trump's comment there. This was it was published today, I think, but it was actually said yesterday. Dmitry Peskov said that he's the spokesman for the Kremlin. Said the Russian Federation is ready to cease fire along the entire line of contact at any time. At the same time, according to Peskov, Russians will do this only under certain conditions. These conditions are as follows. Ukraine must withdraw troops from the territory of all the subject of the Russian Federation, which the Ukrainian oblast that they annexed in 2022. That's the Donbass, Kherson, Zaporizhia regions. Ukraine must also recognize the DPR, Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, Crimea and Sevastopol of the territory of Russian Federation, and that Kiev must refuse to join NATO. That's what Ukraine's saying. Now, that is almost verbatim what Vladimir Putin said this past June the 14th. We've shown you that clip many times. That's where he said they were willing to have an immediate end to the war as long as those terms are being met. So Trump's going to come in and he wants to have a negotiated settlement, but the Russians are saying, repeating rather, that this is our entry-level position. If people don't understand that this is where the war is going to end, this is the minimum that's going to end, then Trump is going to have some difficulties here. If Trump comes in and says, no, we're going to negotiate on the line of contact where it is now, that's where the war is going to end. Then Russia is going to say, then there's no negotiation. We're going to keep fighting. See, that's the problem that I've been illuminating here. Now you're seeing it coming into clarity here. That Trump wants one thing, which is even different than what the Zelensky side wants, but he's been more realistic than anybody else. And the Russian side is saying, yeah, that's not far enough. We want even more here. Because, see, Putin, here's some of the problem. It's not just a matter of what he wants, but Russia would not do well. It would not support Putin if he says, yes, we'll just end the war where it is right now. Because they have been fighting for all four of those oblasts. And right now, especially in the Kherson and Zaporizhia areas, Ukraine still has a considerable portion of those two oblasts. And if Russia allows them to keep those and for Zelensky to stay in power in Kiev and to have interaction with the West, then that is a bad deal for the Russians because they'll say, hang on, we have not paid this extraordinary price. Whatever the actual number is, I bet it's somewhere between 80 and 100,000 Russians killed. It's not minor at all. That number of 600,000 is grossly over-exaggerated, but the real number is huge. It is substantial. And people in Russia know that. They know it's high. And then you add on the hundreds of thousands wounded on top of those that are killed. It's a big price. And Russia has said, look, we're on an existential fight. We fought for keeping those people on our side safe, the ethnic Russians, and this is now Russian territory, and we're not going to have a deal that's going to cede in their minds. And again, this is important. I'm not saying anything is right or wrong, or here's anybody's position you can take. I'm saying this is what they view. And if you don't understand what they view, then you're going to have a hard time having a negotiated settlement if they have the capacity to force the issue. And they do. That's the point. If Trump says, sorry, it's non-negotiable, you have to end the war where at the current line of contact, then Russia can say, then there's no deal. Because Russia can say, we'll simply keep going with the methodical move. More on that in a second, because that's not an empty threat on the Russian side. There is practical graphic evidence that that's not a bad position if they can make good on that. So that puts Trump in a tough negotiating position. Because if he wants to come in and look tough and say, no, I said this is the line, and then Russia ignores it and takes the line they want by force anyway, then that undercuts Trump's position. So he may have to negotiate something that he doesn't want in order to get the outcome that he does want, which is an end to the war. And I think that there is a basis for him to get an immediate ceasefire. But he's going to have to make, I would imagine that the Russian side will require some sort of public acknowledgement that the negotiation is going to be all of the four oblasts. If Trump is not willing to do that, my concern is that Russia may say, then there won't be a ceasefire either. And if Trump makes good on some of the other things that he has said, well, if they don't agree to that, then I'll flood the zone with even more stuff, even more than what Biden has given. That's not going to work, folks. It's not a matter of how much equipment that we've given them. You've seen it. We've given them all kinds of stuff, and it hasn't made a difference on the battlefield. And if Trump just floods it even more, as Biden is already trying to do, is to just put a bunch of stuff in there, you'll see on the ground it's not making any difference. And in fact, let's go and look at that. The Wall Street Journal has a piece out right now where they're saying, look, in terms of the battle for the skies, Russian bombardments have hit a new record. All right, we're closing in on the 3rd year mark of this war. And now Russia has fired. You can see that this is an excerpt from this Wall Street Journal piece out today. Russia fired more than 6,000 explosive drones and missiles against Ukraine over September, October, and November. Dude, that's 6,000 aerial bombardments of various kinds just in a 3-month period. In a 3-month period. Let that sink in for a second. And then it says that was over 3 times the number it fired over the previous 3 months and 4 times over the same number of months in 2023. You see that everywhere graphically depicted, and they actually have a chart from this article, Gary, that one there. So you can see, now pay attention to this chart for more than one reason. You can see that over time, this goes all the way back to, I believe, 2022, late 2022. And then 2023 starts there and left, and then all the months here in 2024. And you see from this summer, you see a dramatic ramp up of the amount of munitions that have been fired. How many times in the first part of this war did you see all these headlines in the Western media that Russia's running out of missiles, that Russia's running out of weapons, and, they're using shovels on the front line, and, they're suffering casualties, their morale's low, and blah, blah, blah. How many times did we hear that? And now you see graphically on the screen right there, in the air power and the drones, that Russia is dramatically ramping up. This matches what I've also been telling you for months, that the Russian defense industrial base is on a full-on wartime footing, and they're continuing to move this further and further along. And now then it is manifesting on the battlefield graphically. So that's the number. And by the way, just kind of as a side note here, when these people had been telling you, lying to you, I don't know if they've been lying or they're just grotesquely insufficiently knowledgeable. I don't know which, but all these claims, whether from President Biden on down, that long-range weapons will make a difference in the war. That's allegedly why Biden allowed them to use it. Zelensky, of course, was saying, yes, this will make a difference. There were maybe 200 total Storm Shadow missiles, ATACMS, the long-range missiles from the United States, and the French version, the Scout, it's called. Less than 200 of those total were available, and they fired a couple of dozen since the authorization was given. And then you see that 6,000 of combinations of missiles and long-range drones have done to Ukraine in 3 months. It has hurt them. It has been really significant in the damage is done, but you see it has not knocked them out of the war. So what do you think 200 are going to do to a country the size of Russia, which is substantially larger than anything that is in the Ukraine side? And they have effective air defenses throughout. A handful of things get through, a handful of things have gotten through, and they have hit fuel depots and command and control centers and weapons depots, et cetera. They have caused some damage in Russia. Has it mattered on the battlefield? It hasn't. So when you hear this statements from the West saying that, the long-range missiles will help, it's just not true. And the evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable on both sides of the line why that's true. But for the moment here, let's focus on the fact that you see that chart that was just show it continuing to escalate every single month. You see that. Look how high it is on the right compared to where it was just earlier this summer, substantially higher in November. Now then, we take that. That's the air power war. Let's look at the actual territory war. Now, I've shown you this chart from the New York Times several times, and this came out in early part of November, and it was through the month of October. And you see that it been in the June there. And if you can't read those words on your screen, underneath that chart, you see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the right. You see there's a little arrow and some words under it. That was June, this past June. This is the amount of square miles that the Russians had gained in each of these months. And I think the one for June was somewhere around 30 square kilometers something. And then every single month thereafter, it continues to accelerate. This was through October, and it was, I believe it was 160 square kilometers that Russia had retaken in that month. Well, New York Times hadn't updated this chart, but somebody else had, one of the war trackers in this. And you see that the similar chart here, if you can see again on your screen, there's a number 50.0 in the middle of the screen there on a red sign. That's June. That's the same month. And so you see the same progression of this chart, but now then you see on the far right, the territory for November. That is 702 square kilometers, which dwarfs even what they did in October. And that's, I think, somewhere around 250 square miles. So the other chart was in miles. This was in kilometers. But this shows you that the rate continues to go up. So it's I think somewhere around 90 additional square miles that were captured by Russia in November, meaning this is continuing on. This is continuing to escalate and to advance. And listen, this is having manifestations, of course, on the ground. All of these casualty numbers we keep talking about, they go up every day, folks. Every day, more and more people are dying on the battlefields on both sides of the line, but more people are dying, obviously, on the Ukraine side. It stands to reason that if Russia has more men and more ammunition and more weapons, that more people on the Ukraine side are going to die. Now, let me show you something from my screen. Oops, sorry, wrong button. Let me show you something on the screen here. I want to show you graphically the battle that's being waged here. I'm going to have to do that in a second. Actually, let me change the order here. I'm going to show you something from Military Summary Channel earlier today, talking about one of the key areas on the Eastern Front that's starting to fall apart.
Furthermore, the Ukrainian sources are saying that the Russian armed forces have established themselves along the western part of Kurachovo Reservoir Dam. At the moment, the Russians are regrouping and accumulating resources to strike later in two directions at once. This will be the village of Dachne and the Kurachovo power plant. In Kurachovo itself, fighting continues in the high-rise buildings in the city center. So the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians in the very near future may try to attack in the direction of Dachne from Stara Terny and in the direction of power plant, which will lead to complete collapse of Ukraine defense belt in this area.
Now, I want to show you that on the map, that area that he's talking about here, and you just kind of see, you can see it in context. This is the Kurachovo right up in here, and you see that there's a number of places. This is in the Pokrovsk front, in the Pokrovsk area, which is up here. But in this area down here, around the Kurachovo, there's a reservoir here. The Russians are making advances in the north and in the south, and actually into the city in this area down here. There's some significant area down here in these high-rise buildings, which have always been the most defensible for the Ukraine side. But now Russia has penetrated troops into there. They continue to take all this territory they've already taken. And you see the danger of it. There's a couple of problems that Russia can move around to here to cut off any of these supplies, because Ukraine side owns all of this. And they're moving up in this direction as well, and that they could literally cut this off. Well, there's also an addition that Russia can move from here and to take this village right here, and move here, as opposed to moving down from the south, in which case this entire area can be cut off. And you see how big this area is. There's also lots of fighting in this area. Well, if they move up in here, that entire area could be closed off, and all of these troops could either be lost, or they will killed or wounded or captured, or they'll have to withdraw very quickly. And then you see there's another small cauldron that's already being formed here. Same kind of situation. Now, all of this, especially with these additional new advances here, is that Russia is now very close. Once they knock that part out, then they can start moving on the city of Pokrovsk itself. And in fact, based on some of the advances of the Russian forces and the preparations phases that have been going on here, they're probably ready to get to come after this. I bet within a week, we'll actually see the Battle of Pokrovsk itself come off. They had moved up to here months ago and then kind of stopped here, and that they started going in some of these other areas. You may recall that we had a show with Colonel Jacques Beau, who from a European former NATO officer, explained to us that Russia wanted to tighten up all these lines here to protect their flanks, so that there's no risk of Ukraine trying to do a flanking maneuver when they start to going into Pokrovsk. If they take this as well, it literally unhinges the whole of the southern part of the front here. And there's still lots of activity going on down here, which implies there's been a buildup of Russian troops down in the south, that they could launch a new offensive down here in the Kherson area. The attacks up in the Pokrovsk area, the Kupiansk area, you see there's continuing to move forward here. Literally everywhere you look on the battlefield, it's continued to move more and more in the direction of Russia and against Ukraine. And this, everywhere you look, folks, in the diplomatic front, Trump has said, we're going to seek a negotiated settlement. I want an immediate ceasefire when he comes in. He couldn't be any more plain. And if you had any questions, his Truth Social, even though he's a little coy in that interview from over the weekend, he was not coy at all in his Truth Social statement. Everything he's done, from people I've talked to that are on his transition team, he means exactly what he says. That is precisely what he's going to try to do. You see, the Russian side is ready. They're willing to negotiate. They're willing to talk. They have some pretty stringent terms, but they are willing to end this war. They don't have this. All this is about to be, all this myth that people have been saying in the West is about to be exposed, that, you know, Russia was just going to go on to the West and they were going to continue to use this as a springboard, has always been nonsense. It's always been nonsense. Russia's been very clear from the outset exactly what their objectives were, and this is not much different than what they said in 2022, in 2021, what their objectives were. And now then they're about ready to manifest those. They're not going to just keep rolling because they know they can't. And they don't want to expand the war. They don't have no interest in expanding the war. They want security on their western border. They don't want to use it as a jumping point to get into more war. Their people are supporting this because it's NATO and 50 nations, as we brag about all the time, that are against Russia. But so their people want to end the war. They want to win it and keep secure. They don't want more war, and they wouldn't support, I bet, anything further to that in a conquest, in a territorial conquest thing, because those aren't Russian lands. And then what would they do with it? I mean, honestly, that's the other thing that people don't like to talk about here, is what would Russia do with it if they did move that? I mean, even into anything beyond the Dnieper River in Ukraine would be an enormous drain on the Russian economy and military for the foreseeable future. Why would Putin has said the same thing. Why would I do that? Why would I want to get a headache for yourself like that about people who despise you and hate you? Because the Western Ukraine absolutely does. And that would just be a nonstop headache forever. And it would be enormously expensive and provide Russia with nothing. See, you don't even have to talk about the morality of it. You just look at the practicality. If Russia doesn't benefit from that, then why would they do it? Because capturing territory that they either can't afford to hold or don't want to, they're not going to. Whereas everything east of the Dnieper, though, different story. So it is reasonable that they may go there at some point. So those things are all coming to pass. It is time for Zelensky. It is time, frankly, for the current administration. And you know, Keir Starmer of the UK and Emmanuel Macron from France, they keep saying stuff about, and you heard Zelensky in that clip I played for you a minute ago. He again says, you know, yeah, they're talking about maybe putting troops in Western Ukraine as peacekeepers. Folks, that ain't going to happen. That is not going to happen. I see almost no chance. I would be shocked, I'll say, and I don't expect to be shocked, that Russia would ever agree to any deal that left Western troops inside of whatever's left of Ukraine. That's why they went to war in the first place. And you can call them peacekeepers. You can say that they're not part of NATO, but they are. And those words mean nothing to Russia. They see Western troops there, and they would regard them exactly as you would expect. Consider, would we ever allow any kind of a negotiated deal with Mexico or Canada and China or Russia with troops and say, well, they're not Russian troops. They're just peacekeepers to keep. Obviously, we would never allow that, and neither will they. So let's just get the myths and the fantasies off the table. Let's just get this whole thing about not dealing with reality and bring it back into a place where this war can come to a merciful end. It should have happened a long time ago, but now Trump is coming in, and by all accounts, he's ready to make a deal, do whatever it takes to get that war off the table. He's got a lot of domestic issues he wants to do, and he's not going to want to spend a lot of time or capital on this deal. I think that he'll probably be willing to make whatever concessions are necessary. They'll put as good a picture on it as they can, but they need to get this off the table so they can focus on the things domestically that are more important to the president, because He's not going to want his whole legacy to be defined by dragging out a war that he already said is pointless and doesn't need to be fought. He wants to focus on other things where he can bring benefit to our country. That's why he was elected, and I think that's what the people are going to expect to see. We'll see how this works out. We'll continue to track it with you. And in fact, also just to let you know, later this afternoon, we're going to be looking at that other big issue that also has something to do with Russia. In the whole collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. We're going to have Ambassador Chaz Freeman, just one of the absolute most knowledgeable experts there is in the Middle East, going to come and explain to us kind of what's really going on with a lot of the chaos that's been happening. Tune in today at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we will see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.